Welcome to the Half Yard Line. I am Luke, and that is all you're getting this week. Yes, dear listener to the Half Yard Line, for the first time in our illustrious history, we have a one-man show this week. Tim, unfortunately, waylaid by some travel plans. It may surprise you and sadden you to learn that this is not yet our full-time profession, but unfortunately that's the case. So you're just riding with me today, Luke, here on the Half Yard Line, and I'm sure the experience will be all the poorer for it, but do try and stick with us till the end, just in case you end up enjoying it. If you are listening to us on a podcast app, find us on the app, hit like, subscribe, leave us a rating and review, super helpful for us. If you're seeing me on YouTube, hello. Sorry, Tim is not here to feast your eyes and ears upon this week. And if you are on the socials, hit us up at Half Yard Line Pod. For all of you who have left us a comment, left us a like, left us a subscribe, slung mud at us, left us a compliment in the rare case, we appreciate it. Whether that's socials, whether that is on the YouTube, or whether it's email halfyardlinepod@gmail.com. Also available for those of you of a more old school slight. As mentioned, a one-man show this week, a slightly abridged pod, and as the NFL has rocketed increasingly towards the postseason, it felt like an appropriate time to look ahead to the playoff picture. We're through week 13. It is in the books, which I believe is the official phrase we say here on the Half Yard Line every single week. We had some interesting games, both blowout variety and closer than expected variety. You have the Texans edging the Broncos, Dolphins expectedly blowing out the Commanders, the 49ers unexpectedly blowing out Philadelphia. So some interesting games over the course of this week, going all the way back to Thursday Night Football, if you can cast your mind back that far, with that 41-38 Cowboys win over Seattle. So thought it would be a good time while I'm unsupervised and there's no adult in the room to give you my prognostications on the playoff picture to be in both the AFC and the NFC, give you my rationale for each. And then, as always, we will crown, in true Half Yard Line Pod tradition, a Jonas Gray Memorial Player of the Week at the tail end of this pod, so stick around for that. But we'll get straight to the nitty-gritty, and we'll start in the National Football Conference, as it's called, the NFC. If you're wondering what that is, kids, ask your parents. The playoff picture stands thusly so far through 13 weeks of NFL football. You've got Philadelphia, fresh off that beating, in the 1 seed slot at 10-2, getting that precious first round bye, which only one team gets these days. It used to be two. We remember those days and look back on them fondly. 2 through 7 is currently the 49ers, the Lions, the Falcons, Dallas, Minnesota, Green Bay. Now, you're listening to that Murderer's Row and you're thinking, God, the NFC seems a lot better than I thought it would be. And I think that's the kind of one of the major takeaways that I kind of have an overall level of this podcast. I mean, you look at the NFC playoff picture going into the season, you said Philadelphia is great. San Francisco should be great as well. Beyond that, is it a Dallas, maybe Detroit, and a lot of meh? There wasn't a lot of expectations on the NFC side of the house. I think one of the biggest takeaways from the NFL season to date is that the NFC is a lot stronger than maybe we gave it credit for. And I have a feeling that it's also going to finish strong as we roll into the playoffs. Everyone came in laboring and layering praise on the AFC for its litany of all-star quarterbacks. Obviously, injuries have taken a toll in the form of, Aaron Rodgers out for the season, Joe Burrow out for the season. You've had Trevor Lawrence just yesterday get injured on Monday Night Football. Looks like he's going to miss a couple of weeks with the sprained ankle. Deshaun Watson out for the season. Kenny Pickett even probably out for the season. Anthony Richardson out for the season. So the quarterbacks have taken a bit of a beating in the AFC, and it's obviously affected the quality of play. I think if you look across the NFC playoff picture, both the one that it is today and the one that I'm about to reveal to you, dear listener, you see a lot more quarterback health across the board. And I do think that unsurprisingly plays a large part in why the NFC is looking so much stronger. It's the most important position on the field, and these guys have largely stayed fairly healthy throughout the season. Most of these teams have still got their starters, with the obvious exception in the current playoff picture of Minnesota through injury and Atlanta, which is kind of semi by choice with the constant rotation there. But all that being said, give you my 1 through 7 come season's end. Remember, there are 5 weeks left, not 4. I'm mainly saying that to remind myself because I keep forgetting that there are more than 17 weeks in the NFL calendar these days. I have number 1 seed, home field advantage throughout the NFC playoffs as far as they go. I have the Eagles holding serve in that slot, finishing 14-3. Second place, Detroit Lions, I have as the second seed. I have the Niners as the third. I know that's going to cause some ruffling of feathers, so we'll get to that in a sec. Tampa fourth, but NFC South. Dallas, then Green Bay, then Seattle. So much of the existing playoff field staying as is. Obviously, not many weeks left, not much chance for teams to make their moves. I did have a couple of kind of fighting notables, I want to say. I had the Rams finishing 9-8, but missing out on postseason football. And I also have Minnesota, who currently find themselves in the 6th seed, having a bit of a stumble and a tumble towards the end of the regular season and finishing 8-9. So also missing out for those big Josh Dobbs fans out there who are sickened. I apologize, but I also like Josh Dobbs a lot. So start at the top of the house. And as I sort of do that, I want to make one thing kind of obvious, and it'll become clear as I talk through these, predictions, if you want to call them that. Everyone looks at playoff pictures and predictions and says, oh, you got to have this team. How could you not have my team versus this team, right? That's what everyone likes to say. The number one thing you have to remember at this point in the season is who is left on each team's schedule. Sounds obvious. I think it's the least talked about, most important thing at this time of year. Most people are still thinking, oh, I love this guy's team, or I love this quarterback, this coach. Of course, all those things matter. The schedule that is upcoming for these teams over the next 5 weeks is going to determine the outcome of the playoff picture. And for some of these teams, they might not have impressed recently. They might not have impressed for large stretches of the season. Someone has to win games. Well, unless there's a lot of ties, which I think is probably unlikely. And I didn't factor into any prognostications, if you're wondering. Someone has to win games. So good teams are going to play bad teams. One thing that I think is great about the playoff picture as it stands today is a lot of the teams that I'm going to talk about are playing against each other. We've spoken a lot about bad football over the course of this season, but I'll give you some highlights as the season kind of draws to a close. We've got this week alone, Seattle at San Francisco, Buffalo at Kansas City, Philly at Dallas, and my sneaky good game for week 14 is Rams at Ravens, so tune in for that one. Week 15, you've got Dallas at Buffalo, you've got Baltimore, Jacksonville, you've got Philly, Seattle. 16, you've got Dallas, Miami, Baltimore, San Francisco. So you've got some great matchups coming. But the majority of the league this year is pretty meh. A lot of these teams are going to play are pretty meh. So when I give you this kind of rundown, and I'll talk through kind of how I see it panning out, bear that in mind and don't hate me too much. But yeah, as I said, the current picture, Eagles, Niners, Lions, Falcons, Dallas, Minnesota, Green Bay. My picture, Eagles, Lions, 49ers, Bucks, Dallas, Green Bay, Seattle. So resequencing. I'll start with the Eagles. I've got them going 14-3. This week, I have them losing to Dallas, so going a little 2-game skid, but their remaining schedule after that, at Seattle, Giants, Arizona, Giants again. So you got to think finishing the season 3-0 is a 100% guarantee, or close to, with those 3 poor opponents to finish. I know San Francisco just beat the doors off them, the brakes off them, the roof off them, probably took the windows too. In Philadelphia, it was embarrassing. It was humbling. It was a one-sided affair. All of those things are true. The Eagles' talent level is just so remarkably high. San Francisco, probably the only roster in the NFL that can compete with what they've got on the field between the lines. And I do think it's tough to come back and bounce back straight away against a good Dallas team who you're playing on the road and who are on fire right now. Dak Prescott playing the best football I've ever seen him play, MVP caliber football. It's going to be a tall order for Philadelphia, so I do have them dropping it. But if you don't think they can beat the Giants twice in Arizona, then I think you're crazy. And I do think they are slightly better than Seattle. I think the main thing with the Eagles has been this like limping and laboring through games. They've won a lot of games this season, 10 so far, more than anyone else in the league. Most of those not very convincing. So they've kind of hung around and pulled out wins late, and San Francisco showed them that you can't do that. And I do think for Philly, it's a good wake-up call and a reminder that things don't come easy all the time. Victories do not come in the mail, as Greg Easterbrook used to say. So I've got Philly holding serve on the 1 seed. Lions as second. I've also got them finishing 4-1 from their current 9-3 position. And the remaining schedule is the main reason why. At Chicago, Denver, at Minnesota, at Dallas, Minnesota again. So again, you've got 2 divisional games, both Minnesota, who I think the shine is kind of off the Josh Dobbs apple a little bit. The Lions are an exciting team to watch. Really great seeing them grow. The offense is really interesting to me at this point in time, because going into the season, I think there was some concerns about who is the other option in the passing game. Obviously, Jared Goff had a great year last year. Amon-Ra St. Brown, one of the best in the game. Who's the other piece? The two running backs have worked out great in Gibbs and Montgomery, but the trade of Hockenson to the Vikings last year depleted this team of skill position talent. Jameson Williams, the snap count is rising. The involvement is rising. The big plays are rising. So I think he's going to continue to have a prominent role as they roll through the rest of this campaign. And I think it's going to lead to them getting the number 2 seed over current cause celebre and best team in the history of ever, San Francisco 49ers, who I actually have losing 2 of their remaining 5 games, which seems unbelievable given what they just did to the Eagles. I'll be honest, the first of these losses I don't have as overly scientific, but it's twofold. I've got them losing to Seattle this week. Mark your calendars, I said it. 2 reasons for that. Number 1, teams that get praised to high heaven as unbeatable, unstoppable juggernauts tend to then immediately be proven to be beatable, stoppable, not juggernauts. So I don't think San Francisco is going to roll through every team scoring 35, 40 points, allowing 15, and, Brock Purdy looking like, Joe Montana reincarnate every single game and going all the way to the Super Bowl that way. I think that's how they're being talked about. I just don't think it's realistic. Now, if any team is going to do that, you would say it's probably the Niners. But it's very, very hard to sustain the kind of unbelievably high caliber offensive fireworks that they've produced for so much of this season. They had the 3-game wobble earlier this year without Trent Williams and Debo. I understand that. But I do also think there is something to defensive coordinators figuring things out as the season goes on. We always see it in the playoffs. Scoring goes down. Towards the end of the season, teams that have had explosive offenses start to come back to the pack a little bit. Now, the Niners, back to the pack is still better than most teams, and I still have them comfortably making the playoffs with a 12-5 record, but the schedule is not that easy. Like I say, Seattle this week is not an easy game. Mentioned off the top, they run Dallas really, really close on Thursday night in a shootout where Geno played out of his mind. They got, obviously, DK, they got Tyler Lockett. If Kenneth Walker's back's big for them, the defense needs some support for the O in the game against San Francisco. But the other thing with Seattle is anyone who's an NFC West watcher, who has been for the last few years, knows that games between these two tends to have weird stuff going on. There's a last minute play. It comes down to the last 10 seconds. There's a miracle pass. There's a deflection at the goal line. There's a tackle, 1 yard from the end zone. Something crazy tends to happen in these games. San Francisco beat Seattle earlier this year, and they're at home coming off a blowout victory. I feel like this is kind of a trap game for them, and I've got Seattle beating them. And I also have the Niners losing to Baltimore, who are one of the best teams in the AFC. We'll talk about in a sec. The rest of their schedule is very winnable. At Arizona, at Washington, and Rams at home to finish. I think those are all wins for faithful to the Bay, as they say. But I just want to tamper everyone's expectations that the Niners are going to run roughshod through the league and score 40 points. I just don't think it's going to happen. So that's my kind of hot takey as part of the NFC. Buccaneers in 4th. I'm not really going to talk about this. The NFC South is terrible. I think the Bucs are the best of a terrible bunch, and I've got them finishing 8 and 9 and making the playoffs, which is another one in the another feather in the cap for the seeding crowd who don't like the fact division winners get to host playoff games. But right now, someone from the NFC South is going to. Why not Tampa? I think they're the best of 4 very, very limited teams. Dallas, I've already mentioned. I think they've got a pretty tough road ahead, but I actually have quite a lot of faith in how they're playing right now. I've got Philadelphia, at Buffalo, at Miami, Detroit, at Washington. So they probably have the hardest schedule of any team I'm going to talk about on this podcast. I have them winning 4 of those games and only losing to the Buffalo Bills on the road. So maybe a bit of a surprise. Maybe I'm overrating the recent success and I'm falling into the sports talk trap, but that's how I've got it. So I have Dallas surging ahead under Dak's stewardship, like I say, playing absolutely outstanding quarterback at the moment, and CD Lamb having a phenomenal season out wide. You add, the Micah Parsons and the opportunistic defense. If they make a few plays, I think Dallas can cause teams a lot of problems, and I've got them continuing to play well. Green Bay and Seattle, I think, are both in that kind of NFL middle class bucket, but I have them both getting into the postseason. Seattle's not right now. They're only 6-6, but I think they've got a pretty easy schedule the rest of the way, at least I should say from week 16 through to 18. Their last 3 games at Tennessee, Pittsburgh, and Arizona, both at home. I think they'll win all 3 of those. I already said I think they're going to win in a kind of freaky way against the Niners. Don't ask me why. I just feel it. Week 15, they've got Philadelphia. That is tough. So 9 and 8 is a real possibility for Seattle. I had them 10 and 7, but I had them in the 7 seed. And Green Bay, the only team I've got winning out for the rest of this campaign. And the schedule is the number 1 reason why. At New York Giants, Tampa at home, Carolina on the road, Minnesota on the road, Chicago at home. Like none of those 5 teams should scare Green Bay at all. Jordan Love playing the best football of his young career. Love how Matt LaFleur is designing that offense. They didn't have Aaron Jones. Christian Watson is now injured, so they're going to have to kind of shuffle the pack. But a lot of horizontal movement in that offense. I think it's well set up to kind of overcome those types of obstacles. And I have a lot of faith that Love's going to keep doing what he's been doing, and they're going to roll on ahead. AFC, I'll move on to that now. Current playoff picture is Miami, Baltimore, Kansas City, Jacksonville, Pittsburgh, Cleveland, Indianapolis. My list: Chiefs, Dolphins, Ravens, Jags, Texans, Browns, Colts. So Kansas City, Miami, Baltimore, Jacksonville, Houston, Cleveland, Indianapolis. Notable misses: Buffalo, Pittsburgh, and the Chargers. Buffalo and the Pittsburgh Steelers I have both going 9-8, but that's not going to be enough because I think the Colts are going to end up winning 10 games, and so are the Browns, and that's going to keep the 9-8s out of the playoffs. The Chargers I've got finishing 8-9, but I don't think anyone's expecting huge things from them. The Chiefs are the AFC team that I have going unbeaten. So I said, Green Bay's the only one I'm talking about, but Green Bay's the NFC team. The AFC, I've got the Chiefs winning every game they've got left. Buffalo next week is the hardest game on the schedule by a mile. They've then got at New England, they've got the Raiders at home, they've got the Bengals at home, and they've got the Chargers on the road. I don't think any of those 4 teams should be concerning to the Chiefs. I know the offense hasn't looked spectacular. Kelsey's not looked the same necessarily this season as he has in years past, had a little bit of an injury problem. The wide receiver group's been sabotaging Mahomes a lot. I just feel like there's something to the holding serve, the mindset, the whatever you want to call it. It is kind of cliche, but this team has done it year after year after year. And any time it's been doubted, they've come back and they've been the 1 seed again. It happened last year. Tyreek Hill leaves. Well, what this team going to do? Well, they put out spectacular performances, and they were number 1 offense in the league, and they made the playoffs and they won the Super Bowl as the 1 seed. So I feel like they're going to hold serve because there's not going to be the panic button pressed in Kansas City like there will be in other places, because the 1 seed's now so valuable with no other team getting a bye. I think there's going to be some jitters in these less experienced playoff teams who are going to maybe just have a wobble at the wrong time, and it's going to lead to them dropping a game when they shouldn't, or maybe when they could avoid it. And the Chiefs just won't. So I think the easy schedule plus the experience gives the Chiefs the edge. 13-4 finish, and they've got them going on as the 1 seed based on the tiebreakers over the 2 and 3 seeds on conference winning percentage, because I have the Dolphins and the Ravens both at 13-4 to wrap the season up. So both of them 9-3 now, both of them going 4-1 down the stretch. Both of them have a mix of kind of the winnable, the not winnable. Dolphins have got Tennessee, Jets. Then they've got Dallas. Then they've got at Baltimore, Buffalo finish. So that's a tough finale for the Dolphins. Heard the term paper tiger thrown around about the Dolphins, right? Where they've gone 0-3 against the good teams they've played, and they beat the crap teams. Listen, they're playing a couple of crap teams in the next 2 weeks, so my Titans are going to take a shellacking. So are the Jets. Dallas, Baltimore, Buffalo to finish is rough, but I do think they're going to find a way to get over the hump and turn that story around at least a little bit, to maybe finish the season with 2 wins against quality opponents, and that will give them the push they need to get into the postseason. And they're a team with obviously an outstanding offense. The defense has been hit with the Jalen Phillips injury, which is not great timing wise, obviously, but I do feel like there's enough talent on this team that they can kind of flip the script a little bit on that sort of current outlook on their prospects, and they're going to find a way to win some tough games down the stretch and finish second. The Ravens, again, mixed bag. They've got the Rams this week, who I think, again, sneaky, interesting game. Jags the week after without probably Trevor Lawrence. Then they've got at San Francisco, which is the banner game of week 16, as I said off the top. So an interesting one to tune into in a couple of weeks' time. Then they've got Miami, which is a tough one. They've got Pittsburgh at home. Whether that's Pickett or Trubisky, I don't think makes a difference at this stage. The Ravens, I think, are an interesting use case. They've kind of gone a bit quietly through the season. We've seen some of the same story with the rushing attack guys coming out of nowhere. Keaton Mitchell suddenly entering into the mix as this explosive change of pace guy to the Gus bus. Lamar not using his legs as much as we've seen. I think some of that is preservation. I think Todd Monken's called a great offensive scheme for them so far. The loss of Mark Andrews obviously is enormous, and he is an irreplaceable piece, but I think some of that can be answered by allowing Lamar off the leash a little bit more and using his legs. We haven't seen the dynamic running that we're so used to with him, where he breaks long ones and he makes 3 or 4 guys miss. And I think some of that's him being smart with his, career and his self-preservation in a way that guys like Josh Allen haven't been necessarily of late, just taking a lot of hits. I think they're going to let him off the leash a little bit, and I think they're going to have a strong finish, going 4-1 and finishing third. I have the Jags holding serve in the AFC South over the Texans, who I've got as the 5th seed. The Jags going to finish 11-6. So are the Texans, but win percentage in division games matters, and I think the Jags are going to do better in the division as it finishes than the Texans are. The Jags schedule is at Cleveland, then Baltimore, then they finish at Tampa Bay, Carolina, Tennessee. So again, with a couple of these teams, you've got those easy run-ins. Really, they should win all 3 of those final 3 games. I hope, as a Titans fan, they lose to us, but I don't think they will. The next 2 weeks, which I'm guessing, in my non-medical opinion, is the Trevor Lawrence injury window, is going to cost them. Cleveland, one of the best defenses in football. It's on the road. If it's bad weather with CJ Beathard, do I think the Jags are going to hang? No, I don't. I think Baltimore's a better team, so I don't think they'll beat them either. And then that 3 easier victories to ease Trevor Lawrence back into the picture come season's end means they're going to win the AFC South and host a playoff game at 11-6 down there in Jacksonville. Get in the pool if you enjoy that kind of thing. Watching Peyton and Eli react to that on the Manning cast was highly enjoyable television for those who didn't see it. As I mentioned, Texans I got in the 5th slot. The most kind of surprising team in the entire NFL, I think. Out of nowhere, CJ Stroud's the story. He's on pace for 5,000 yards. D'Amico Ryan's on pace for probable coach of the year consideration, and well-deserved. Not the easiest schedule on paper just because it's divisional and you never know with these games. I have them splitting against my Titans, which is my one homer pick of this entire thing because obviously we're not in the picture. But they've also got the Jets. They've got Cleveland as well in that mix. And they've got the Colts, so Titans twice in there. I just feel like 4 of those 5 is not assured, but is a should happen. And I feel like the Texans are going to continue to ride this wave that they've had throughout the season and get into the postseason at 11-6, 5th seed behind CJ Stroud. Tank Dell's a big loss for this team. Of course, not stacked in the wide receiver positions as it is. I think they find a way, and I think they get the job done to finish 5th. The Browns are probably the most interesting and underwhelming of this entire group. They're 7-5 right now. I have them 10-7. They've got winnable games. They've got the Jags without Lawrence. They've got the Bears at home, and they've got the Jets at home. And they've got the Bengals on the road in the last game of the season, which is not going to feature Joe Burrow. I feel like 3 of those 5 is very, very doable for this team. And in an suddenly underwhelming AFC, I think it does the job. Colts, I'll wrap up with them. Probably the second most surprising team after the Texans to be making the postseason, especially given the quarterback's injured. I just watched the Colts somehow beat my Titans in a game they should have lost. They blocked 2 punts. The Titans' 3 best players all go out injured in the same game. And they still only made overtime because the backup holder, Ryan Tannehill, kind of didn't get the kick down in the right place or in the right timing. So the Titans missed a PAT. It should have been 26-25 Titans at the end of regulation. It wasn't. It was 25-all. The Colts won in overtime. Minshew Mania takes over every now and again, and it kind of did in this game. I don't think they're a very exciting team. I don't think they're a particularly dangerous team. But I think in an AFC which has not got the most amount of talent, when you're playing at Cincinnati, at Pittsburgh, at Atlanta, Vegas, Houston, both at home, I think winning 3 of those is very, very doable. Even if you do, as I do, have them dropping the Cincinnati game this week. Pittsburgh on the road with backup quarterback Bonanza, I'd see them winning that game just about. Atlanta is terrible. The Vegas Raiders are also terrible. So again, 3 wins for the Colts puts them at 10-7 and keeps the Bills and the Pittsburgh Steelers out at 9-8. So just to wrap up, before we go to the Jonas Gray Player of the Week, NFC, Eagles, Lions, 49ers, Bucks, Dallas, Green Bay, Seattle, Chiefs, Dolphins, Ravens, Jaguars, Texans, Browns, Colts in the AFC. That's your playoff picture. There it is. I used paper for my notes. Deal with it. So, as I mentioned, we're going to crown the Jonas Gray Player of the Week to wrap this solo pod. And Tim will be pleased because not only was he not here to hear me crap all over the Steelers, but the guy who won the Jonas Gray Memorial Teaspoon this week plays for the Cardinals who just beat them. I'm talking, of course, about Josh Woods, linebacker, who racked up 11 tackles and a TFL in this game. Not an overwhelming statistical day, you would say, but a guy who's overcome a lot to get into this position and is rightly crowned this week's Jonas Gray Memorial Player of the Week for his efforts. Just to very briefly, for those who don't know, a Jonas Gray player comes out the clear blue sky to do something awesome in the vein of Jonas Gray, who disappeared back into obscurity. We support all Jonas Gray Memorial Players of the Week in their quest for NFL success. Josh Wood, the latest to join the ranks, stepping in to replace Kazir White, who has been injured and is not playing in this game. Josh Wood, with his 6th start of the year, he's in his 5th year, 6'1", 230-pound linebacker who was undrafted in 2018. He's from Baltimore originally. He was a corner and a receiver in high school. His senior year, one of those great high school statistical lines, 35 tackles, 4 interceptions, 35 catches for 800 yards, 10 touchdowns. So doing a little bit of everything. And his efforts were honored with All-Metro in Baltimore, and his team won the state title, McDonough High School in Owings Mills, Maryland. Which is a great name for a place. He stayed in state, went to Maryland to play for the Terrapins. He played DB. Again, you're probably thinking, well, you said he was a linebacker, but in college, he only weighed 204 pounds. So it was his listed weight. So he was a lot lighter back then. And he was playing as a defensive back. His last couple of years really ramped up his defensive presence. He was more of a special teams guy to begin with. But he goes into the NFL draft cycle completely unheralded, to the point where NFL.com doesn't even have a draft profile on this guy. For those who follow the draft, every single basically draft eligible player gets one. There are hundreds every single year. This guy did not have one. So no surprise, not a combine invitee. No surprise, not drafted. Although some of these guys were not drafted that year too. Pretty good crop of undrafted free agents in 2018. Philip Lindsay, Gus Edwards, Charvarius Ward, JC Jackson, Frankie Louvu, Jeff Wilson Jr., Robert Spillane. It's a pretty good group of guys who didn't get drafted who've gone on to carve out successful NFL careers. And Josh Wood's among them. Although he didn't take the traditional route. When we do the Jonas Gray players a lot of the time, we talk about guys who were like free agency signings after the draft. Not this guy. So not only was he not drafted, he didn't get the standard route into the NFL. He went to a veteran minicamp and had a tryout in that and got signed off the back of that. So a lot of guys who come out of the draft undrafted will get signed as priority free agents. Like, oh, we got to have this guy. You know, he was a 7th rounder. We had a 6th round grade on him or something, and he fell. So we're going to try and sign him as a young undrafted free agent. Not Josh Woods. Stumbled out of the gate, but into a veteran minicamp and made the Bears willing to sign him after that tryout, which is pretty amazing and something you don't see that much anymore. It's really something you see in like old-timey football. He signed to the practice squad for the Bears, and for the year, obviously, he learned the position and notably gained about 30 pounds so he could play linebacker in the NFL. He finally got onto the active roster 2019. Funny story about his ascent is usually we associate it with like Hard Knocks, right? Like the guy who gets the phone call, like crying on the phone, I made the roster, or the coach calls him into this office, there's a big hug. No, not Josh Woods. He just went to a meeting. He hadn't been told he was cut yet. And then about halfway through the meeting, Matt Nagy, who was the Bears coach back then, just apparently said, oh, yeah, by the way, everyone in this room's on the roster. So not much emotion, not much spectacle there, but he did make the roster and basically became a special teams ace for the Bears, which was with the Bears for a couple of years before he went to Detroit, where he finally made his first NFL start in 2021. So this is quite a while after he went undrafted. You're talking of quite a few years in the league. Made a start in which he had 13 tackles and 2 TFLs against Teddy Bridgewater's Denver Broncos. Remember them? Nope, no one does. Unfortunately, then injured his neck, went on IR straight away. Re-signed with Detroit in the end, but only as a special teams guy. And then Arizona signed him in March on a 1-year deal. So his 6th start, as I said, of the year, 11 tackles and a TFL. A guy who went undrafted, who went to a tryout just to make it to the NFL and is now in his 5th season, having changed positions to linebacker. Josh Woods, highly deserving and recognized Jonas Gray Player of the Week. And we salute you. That will do it for this week's solo pod. Hope you've enjoyed it. Hit us up on the socials at halfyardlinepod, halfyardlinepod@gmail.com if you email. Find us on YouTube. Find us on your podcast app of choice. Hit like, subscribe, rate, review, all that stuff. Tim and I will be back with you next week, where he will no doubt shout at me about telling you how crap the Steelers are. And then you'll be back to having his, as I'm assured, syrupy voice in your ears. So hope you look forward to that. Hope you've enjoyed kicking it with me here today. We'll be with you again next week. Bye.